May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be aligned with your love, O God, our strength, our courage, and our freedom. Amen. Last week was a continuation of some deep, amazing, and positive shifts in our culture. I have in mind right now the accomplishments of the legislative branch of the National Episcopal Church. Both the House of Bishops and the House of Deputies agreed upon and passed legislation to make the sacrament of marriage available to same-sex couples throughout the church, in all of the dioceses, to remove from our church laws mention of the words husband and wife and replace those words with the words a couple, and to authorize liturgies for marriage in our church, liturgies that do not distinguish between types of couples. No longer does the National Episcopal Church have same-sex or opposite-sex marriage. We now have marriage, period. I was thrilled to see that the Bishop of Alabama, where my wife Hope and I are planning to move next summer in my retirement, is authorizing his clergy to marry without prejudice against same-sex couples. Many other steps to inclusion, justice, and peace were taken in Salt Lake City before the deputies returned home last night. The church voted to divest our money in fossil fuel companies. The church voted to take actions to interrupt mass incarceration practices in the United States. As you know, they disproportionately punish people of color. And the National Church named as a book to be read by all of us Episcopalians in the next 3 years, the guidebook which spells out the realities of mass incarceration, Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. Many other accomplishments, too many to enumerate in this sermon, will be reported on in an upcoming Sunday in our education hour. But for now, we are glad to have back with us so many All Saints members who went to make General Convention happen, including voting deputies Jim White and Susan Russell. Susan was an official member of the Marriage Task Force, the product of which was voted into church law. Now, as a way of segueing into the work that you and I think, are called to do in our worship service today, on this Independence Day celebration, a final note from Salt Lake City. The President of the United States wrote a letter to the new presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church. For the first time in both bodies, the presidents are black men. In his public letter to Bishop Michael Curry, President Barack Obama wrote, "Dear Bishop Curry, as you prepare to begin serving as presiding bishop, I send warm congratulations. Since our nation's earliest days, faith communities across our country have shown us how a willingness to believe and a dedication to care for others can enrich our lives. Your leadership over the years has reflected your powerful vision for a more inclusive tomorrow. Guided by your commitment to a future of greater compassion and opportunity, I trust you will continue to use your gifts to bring people of all faiths and backgrounds together." And here's what I want to emphasize: to realize the America we know is possible. To realize the America we know is possible. That is the frame that we at All Saints put around our celebration of July the 4th. And the reason we do it with such gusto, we have pride and respect for the core stated values of our nation, particularly that value of acknowledging that all persons are created equal. And at the same time, in this same service, you and I confess that we are not yet there. We are not yet a perfect union. And so we sing as we enter, God mend thine every flaw. And later we will place on this table of consecration and transformation an American flag, folded rather than waving unfurled, as a way of saying that our mission of equality is not yet fully accomplished. Invoking President Obama's eulogy in Charleston week before last again, it is already being embraced as a hallmark oration of his presidency and a historic landmark in the history of speeches in America, resonant with the vision of both Abraham Lincoln and Martin Luther King Jr., particularly when the president took a panoramic vision of America shared by Lincoln and King as a country in the process of perfecting itself, as the New York Times critic wrote about it. This critic continued, like many classical eulogies in the history of eulogies, the narrative begins by memorializing the dead and then addresses the tasks remaining for the living, exhorting the congregation and the nation, as Lincoln put it, to finish the work we are in. President Obama spoke of how history must be a manual to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past while building a roadway to a better world. So, we here at All Saints this morning are gathered today for full-throated singing of patriotic hymns without any pride or claim that the United States has arrived in perfectly walking the talk of our highest visions. We gather together today to thank God for the highest of the humanistic values which founded our country, while at the same time vowing to transform those values that still dangerously infect our nation. Remembering that patriotism without criticism has no head, and criticism without patriotism has no heart. Furthermore, I am trying to stay out of denial about the fact that this is my last 4th of July sermon as All Saints Rector. And so I want to ask your indulgence to speak a bit personally. Before I go there, I want to underscore that there is a spiritual principle behind what I want to say today. It is Richard Rohr's most oft-quoted saying, that pain which is not transformed is transmitted. Any pain that is not, any wound that is not transformed gets transmitted. Therefore, hurt people. And transformed people transform people. And people who are healing, in the process of healing, heal people. I sometimes wonder that truth may be the deepest truth that energizes us here, both on the personal level, for those who have come for a personal spiritual sermon this morning, as well as the cultural political level. What brings us together here in this room, week in and week out, is that all of us are trying to take some responsibility with our lives so that we don't transmit our pain and our wounds. Rather, we want to transform them so that we can be transformative healing powers in our world and in our time. The personal element is that I am a child of the American South, specifically one of the states that seceded from the Union. My home state of Georgia was on the wrong side of the Civil War. The Civil War that had as its battle flag the Confederate flag. That flag that was honored by the man who killed our 9 sisters and brothers in the Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston last month. I'm not interested in blaming, shaming, or attacking anyone else, including myself. And at the same time, in the interest of spiritual health, I want to do my part in transforming what needs not to be transmitted anymore in our country. I'm speaking of a Confederate consciousness, which is another phrase for white supremacy or white superiority. The Confederate flag must be removed from all public places of honor and then placed in museums as teaching instruments about how depraved human beings can be and about the horrors of the tortured, slaughtering, dehumanizing practice of slavery in this country. The Confederate government, whose army deployed that flag, under which that man slaughtered people in the church house. That Confederate government made clear that its only purposes at the time were the protection of slavery and white supremacy. So at the same time that we remove the Confederate flag, we cannot be in denial that there remain today forceful, deadly, and dangerous feelings that are deep within the history of our country. And when those feelings are given political power, and certainly in the case of the Charleston murderer are given guns, then people of color pay the price with their lives. Either in eruptions of hot violence in one's institutional and personal racism, or slow, grinding, cold violence we witness in institutions like institutional poverty and mass incarceration and the absence of comprehensive immigration reform, the roots of which are often in white supremacy. So underneath the flag is a consciousness that must be dismantled within ourselves and within our national policies. James Baldwin said, "White supremacy in these yet-to-be United States is far more complicated and tenacious than we're inclined to acknowledge." The president of the North Carolina NAACP and the leader of the Moral Mondays movement in North Carolina, named the Reverend Dr. William Barber, said the other day, after the massacre in Charleston, "The perpetrator has been caught, but the killer is still at large." Brian Stevenson, our wonderful friend, who spends his life combating the death penalty and getting people off death row in Montgomery, Alabama, said, "I really do believe that this country never committed itself to a conversation about the legacy of slavery." What we're trying to do in Alabama is to focus on what slavery did to America, what lynching and terrorism did to America, what segregation and Jim Crow did to America. And we're focused on these historical eras because we've just never had the conversation we needed to have. Very few people in this country have any awareness of just how expansive and how debilitative and how destructive America's history of slavery is. One of the dark things I think we have to look at as people who want to continue the revolution is that when that murderer killed those people in the Emmanuel sanctuary who were praying and begging him to stop, he said these words: "You rape our women and you're taking over our country and you have to go." Now, I'm not a historian, but from what little I've read about the Confederacy in times of slavery, during the Civil War, during Reconstruction, and then during the period of Jim Crow on into the post-World War II Black freedom movement and into civil rights period, and then after civil rights, this period we've been in with the drug laws that have mass incarcerated so many people of color. The three threads that have linked all of those periods of time that I'm referring to as white supremacy or white superiority or Confederate consciousness, the three fears have been consistent. White people fearing that they're going to lose their power to people of color, that black men are going to have their sexual ways with white women, and that people of color are prone to be criminals. Now, that was present in this kid who killed those people. It was present in the leaders of the Confederacy. It's present in the District of Columbia polarization since President Obama has been our president. All of it has been, we must stop Obama and what he represents taking over our power. And in terms of this fear of rapists, this kid not only said, "You rape our women," but when Donald Trump the other day announced his presidency, his efforts to be president, and said the most horrendously racist thing about people who immigrate from Mexico, he talked about there being rapists. And we could kind of dismiss bloviation like that. However, his polls shot up immediately so that he became number 2 in the GOP lineup. That is the presence of Confederate consciousness. And in terms of crime, there are unconscious white supremacist fears making it hard for some American police officers to tell the difference between a phantom fear and a genuine threat. And that leads some to pull a trigger too quickly. And that leads others to justify it. And that leads still others to shoot first and dodge questions later. Now, I believe that we have to look our flaws in the face and pray that God mend them all. And I don't do that without hope. For most of my years as rector of All Saints Church, I have been involved in a small group of multicultural colleagues meeting 4 times a year for the purpose of looking at our own multiculturalism skills and developing more, and to look at our blind sides. And in this peer supervision process, we make contracts with ourselves about where we want to be 12 months down the road each year that we're together. And my experience with making those contracts is it's like throwing an anchor out into clear, wonderful, desirable water, and that pulls your ship toward that goal over the course of those 12 months, such that a new world and a new life is possible. That is why I'm preaching this sermon today. I do believe that a new world and a new life are possible. White superiority is a mindset that is fear-based, but we worship a God who is love-based, and that love-based God will overcome every ideology that is based in fear, including the Christian white superiority theology. The generative forces in the universe are behind us, are in one another. We can change. We can be a people who live out our values that all persons are created equal. We can be transformed. We can be healed so that we can be transformers and healers. We can create a new narrative, a new song, a new arc of our journey in which all are seen as created equal. That is real American traditionalism. That is real American patriotism. And that is continuing the revolution. And we are going to create our contract here in the next 9 months that pulls us to more sophisticated, healing, transformative, multiculturalism skills so that we can do our part in creating a more perfect union. Amen.